Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Kurt Steege, the CTO at Thundercat. Kurt, thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Terry.
Let's start with the big picture. When you talk to federal agencies about AI and the hybrid cloud, what are they most excited about?
Oh, geez, that may take the whole interview here. Because there's so many things that are out there right now. Like everybody's like the hard part. So there's two parts to it. Everybody's like, hey, there's all these mandates, all these discussions about like where do we need to go? What actually is happening right now? Like how do we move forward? How do we do AI, right? And like in a lot of cases, we have to sort of boil it back down and look at a couple of different areas and see, are you ready to do, kind of everything? Like it goes back to, folks who've been around the government for a while, like myself, right? Many, 10, 12, 14 years ago when folks started looking at the cloud specifically. And I know we're getting to hybrid IT, so cloud's involved there, but there were mandates about, hey, let's use the cloud. And a lot of times people were just kind of tossing things there and saying, hey, I've got a backup up there, so I'm using the cloud for this, don't bother me anymore. It's a little bit different now when we talk about AI. And cloud had its pains in growing and where we went in that space in terms of doing real work versus just putting something out there. AI is coming in and being pretty exact right up front, saying, I can do these things. I can make your life easier. I can do, I can work through a couple of areas. And a lot of times what we find is that areas like data are really important in the space, right? And maybe the data is not ready. And where is your data and how do you look at it? So it kind of, when we have the conversation as we talk through, say, four main principles, right? So data, where is it? Where does it live? How can you move it? How can you get access to it? Why it stays where it stays? We know we have that kind of issue in the government space as well. So and then you've got the compute side of it. What side of that do you need to do? Are you doing everything internally? Do you need to leverage cloud resources, which I know we'll talk about, right? Then you get into when you talk through the government space, the security and compliance, right? There's a lot more compliance boundaries that we have to deal with. You don't want to just leave things here and just toss them out into the ether and say, oh yeah, it'll be fine out there, right? And then the last is sort of that connective tissue. How do we get from one to the next, to the next, to the next? And that's the whole trick with the hybrid AI space.
So, do agencies come to you with sort of I don't know what that AI is, but I want some of it? Or do they come to you with strategy?
So one of the areas that I know has been working quite extensively is in healthcare AI. So the work that we've done with the Veterans Administration, right, and building into the space where they're looking at taking multiple different imaging and going through that imaging using artificial intelligence to find issues, right? So detecting problems before folks even know that they're there. We run through those kind of spaces. There's been a lot of different amazing artificial intelligence work in the science space, right? I think those are probably the ones that were at the cutting edge and had a plan in place ahead of time. Whereas some of the other ones have come to us like, for example, like, not just federal, but, state, local as well. They come to us and say, hey, I need to do AI. What do I want to do this, right? And again, that's where we have to go back to those sort of principles of data and compute and what do you have, where can you get access to it, and how do we get there? Because there's so many, AI is not just a one, even though one shot is one of the things that you hear about when you talk about AI, but AI is not just a one trick pony. There are a lot of different areas where it makes sense, right? There are areas where we talk about natural language processing and sentiment analysis when you're looking, maybe you're looking through as a law enforcement entity looking through social media to find a person, right? This happens across all of the different law enforcement agencies, right? There's a bit of that in there. There's machine learning when you're trying to work through issues. So there's a project going on with the Air Force where they're looking at all these different parts in somewhere, more than 15 plus different systems on airplanes, and they're going through those systems and pulling back that information and looking for failure before it happens. Again, like sort of that that discussion. You know, how do we use machine learning? How do we look at things like vibration, like temperature and things like that, pull that in? Same thing's been happening in the weather space for many, many, many years, right? And how do we go that route? So, and then you get into the more natural sort of things. So you talk through a chat bot when you're doing help desk right now, and you can use a chat bot to take one thing to the next and say, okay, now because I'm having this conversation, no, you're not really fixing it. Open a ticket for me. I just got off a call a little while ago with a company called Tynes, and they're doing cybersecurity work. And how do you create workflows in order to make sure that you're going from what you're detecting, from all the noise that's there, to the right signal, so that you can make your choices, make your in a lot of cases, there's the human in the loop side of things as well. It's like, okay, here's all your information. Now you make the choice. At some point, there's going to be an idea of like, how do we then automate that to say, okay, now we've seen this event multiple times. We know what we have to do when this happens. Just go do it now, right?
So you're describing some really complex scenarios and situations, and I know Thundercat plays a unique role in this ecosystem. How do you describe what Thundercat does in bringing together partners like Dell and Amazon Web Services and Red Hat to deliver one of those unified solutions that you're describing?
Yes, I mean, so one of the things that I think Thundercat is very good at is we have very experienced folks. We have a full engineering staff. We have an integration facility where we can do things. We have a brand new um, innovation lab, which we call Aurora, where we're able to then take information, and we've got some of the latest hardware in there so that we can test compute capacity. We can test different LLMs. We can do that kind of work in that space. So one of the things that we feel that we're quite good at, and maybe the term is overused, but being a trusted advisor, we work with 600 different OEMs, so we can get through and say, these guys, there could be many reasons, but this set of tools is going to work well for you. So we always try to look at architectures and not tools. Myself being a former enterprise architect with the FBI, we look at the architecture and we look at the use cases, right? So how do you see what you're trying to do, and then what certain tools, what OEMs would fit with that, right? There might be a couple of different ones that will do the same process. And then it gets down to well, this group does this better versus that group. This is the kind of thing you want. We can go in that space. So I think what Thundercat is best at is actually looking at the entire architecture, and then understanding where your holes are, so that you can sort of plug those things, or work through a full solution to say, okay, well, you don't have anything in this space. How do we then get you to the next space? And it's an evolution more than just, hey, buy this and we go away. One of the things that I think has been quite exciting about working here specifically is the expertise that we have, not only in the technology field, but the folks that we work with they're all long-term folks that work with their agencies and work with different groups for many, many tens and 20 years in some cases, many times.
That kind of customized team building is a skill unto itself, but how do you then make sure that the teammates that you're bringing together actually have seamless handoffs across each of the stages of a project or an AI deployment, data movement, orchestration, cloud scaling? How do you make that seamless to the client?
Well, again, there's a couple of different ways in that way, in the way that happens. So, like from a Thundercat perspective, so I work a lot with a couple of folks on the artificial intelligence side and high performance computing. We have an entire team that really works in the cybersecurity space. We have a team that works, a group that works specifically on the cloud side. So I do a lot of the infrastructure stuff. We have folks that are in both spaces and work through that. But in almost every situation, we're working either with the teams on the ground at the different agencies, or consultants in that space where they're doing the implementation. and we try to do our best to kind of weave that and make sure everything works really well. We have a project management group that can handle a lot of that work as well. And it kind of goes depending on, what roles are needed to be filled where. We can do it, and we work with everybody to make sure that happens in a most smooth way possible.
Any particular challenge that you find yourself coming back to over and over?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I did say I need to do AI. That's certainly one that's out there. I think the biggest challenge right now, across the board is that, the preponderance of information and data, and how do we get a handle on that? And then you kind of start to build into, once you have a handle on your information, how does that data then become enriched in order to best use it within the artificial intelligence space? So I think we come back to the data question very often, regardless of whether we're talking about, more general purpose sort of AI and chatbot kind of things. Is, how do you get the information that you need in order to respond correctly and generate that information? How do you get the information from a context perspective when we talk about the aircraft before, making sure you have all very, very disparate systems that in many cases surprisingly don't talk to each other very well. And then on the cybersecurity side, right? You take that information, you have to make sure that if you're doing, you have to make sure that the context with which that information was collected and what that means to something else. So making those joins is probably one of the things that we come back to very often. And what we wind up doing in a lot of cases is finding a solution for that before we can do any of the other pieces or parts.
Kurt, before we went to break, we were talking about how Thundercat works with customized teams of partners to deliver AI. Let's talk now about integration. What does it take to make sure that all of the pieces of an AI deployment actually work together?
So it's again a fairly multi-layered question, right? So because there are so many pieces to it, there's the data piece of it, there's the orchestration side of it, and then there's how do you scale that and move it up and down. One of the nice things I did mention a little bit earlier is our test lab, Aurora. We can do some of that work there. We're also able to, with our integration facility, we're also able to basically put the stuff together ahead of time, break it in, burn it in, make sure that it's ready to go, and then ship it out as a single unit. Because as you know, there's lots of things that come into play when we start to build these things out. There are compute issues. Issues is probably not the right word. There's an amount of compute power that needs to be dealt with and benchmarked. There are data issues. There are networking speed and bandwidth, questions. There are storage questions, right? And then how do you orchestrate all that from a software perspective? And then, if you are going to start to talk through, a hybrid solution where you have some internal and some cloud, how do we then deal with that piece of it, right? A lot of folks are bringing up some of their test stuff in the cloud right now, mostly because of the infrastructure issues that are inherent in the space right now. I don't know how much you or your listeners are going through these things, but the power that and the cooling that is being consumed in order to run some of these latest and greatest chips from places like NVIDIA and Intel and AMD, we're talking a single rack. Like 15 years ago when I was designing a data center for the FBI, we were like, okay, how do we get from 5 kilowatts per rack to 10 to 15 to 20, right? We're talking over 100 in a single rack right now, right? So some of the solutions, I'm working on a solution right now where we're talking 120 to 130 kilowatts per rack. And that then, that's one rack that you're sitting in a data center, and it uses up that power fairly quickly. They get very hot. A lot of them are also the latest and greatest solutions are using liquid cooling. Many data centers aren't equipped for that yet. So folks are going to the cloud first in many cases as they build out their internal environment. We ran into this specifically with the first university to build out this infrastructure in the cloud with NVIDIA, University of Albany, who we helped with that work, right? So they built it there because they were starting an AI curriculum, AI professors, and all this other stuff. But they had planned to do it internally, but couldn't do it internally because their data center wasn't ready to support the hardware itself. So build it out there first, start everything, and then you can start to bring things internally. So that's something that was very important in a lot of those spaces.
That's got to be an interesting conversation with the client who thinks they just want the AI functionality and they haven't really thought about the infrastructure that it's going to take to support that chatbot, that analytics, those
Yeah.
other sorts of functions
Yep.
that they
Yep.
want.
Exactly. And in that case, we kind of have to go through almost like a decision framework to make sure that things are like that they understand what they need, right? So first, sort of identify the problem. What do you really want to do? Like we've had conversations with folks that want to do things like um, manage storm surge on coastal towns, right? So identify your problem, then say the next thing that's a fun tool to use is inversion. So say what can go wrong. So when you're talking on the security side, what happens if that data has access? What happens if you've left, you know, classified data in a space where it can be accessed, or just sensitive data, right? You know, how can you fail? And then you can go back and say, all right, now that I know where these rocks are, how do I then sort of arrange it so that I can fix that, right? Figure out what the constraints are. You know, can you run it in your data center now? Is your data available to be moved to a cloud solution, right? Even a FedRAMP, and they have IL5, you know, they have kind of up the stack of impact level on FedRAMP solutions, right? Then kind of simplify it, you know, so, you know, kind of get that complexity out, understand how you can orchestrate, how you can be consistent there. And then once you have that, so that kind of runs through um, a lot of your initial, you know, proof of value, minimum viable product is another way to put that out there. Say, okay, we have that. Okay, now how do we scale that? And that's kind of the way that we go through a lot of the space, and how do we look through those things.
Well, that scalability question is important too, because AI is moving so fast, the technology, you have no idea what the technology can do kind of around the next time corner. So, as you're helping clients design their AI solution, how do you bring in that consideration of sustainability and scalability?
Well, I mean, that the first there's two parts to that question. So the first part is the scalability side, right? It's the whole question of velocity versus speed, right? You know, speed is how fast you're going to get there, right? But if you're going the wrong direction, you're going to run into a wall, right? So velocity is speed plus direction. So you're kind of you gotta make sure that you're moving in the right direction. So that's why you got to take those early steps to make sure you're going in the right direction. You know, and how do you make sure that that is working, right? Is it, you know, from a sustainability standpoint, from a you know, one of the tools that's out there, one of the important pieces of any AI platform is its explainability, is that it's not a black box. It can be for sure, but you have to be able to explain where that answer came from. Is that answer ethical? You know, so, you know, part of the thing that I know the Army has done is put this human in the middle, human in the loop, so that those final decisions are always made by a human and not by a computer. And, you know, making sure that you're dealing with things that are ethical and free from bias. Sometimes there are some questions about, you know, what data you use for what. Um, One of the you know, there are a couple of areas where that has caused some issues in terms of hiring practices, in terms of some other things where, you know, making sure that the system itself was not biased towards a certain group.
So, building in that anti bias is one thing, but again, Your concept of velocity, direction, and speed just makes me want to ask, what is what is the role for Thundercat in helping agencies sort of see around that corner or stay ahead of the curve or pick your velocity metaphor? How do you help
Sure.
them see what's coming next and prepare?
Stay on the rails, right? But I mean, so I think that it comes back to the experience on the Thundercat side is that we're working with many different agencies and, both federal, both state, local. It's interesting that the some of the recent edicts that have come down has kind of left a bunch of things up to the state. So now that gets a bit more complex because every state might have a different rule for what you're looking at, right? So I think what's important for us in terms of that experiential side is that we're working with folks who have been down the path already. So anybody in the company can leverage me to say, okay, you worked here with the Air Force and you're doing this with the Department of Energy and you're doing this with with my former colleagues at the FBI and talking to those guys, and these folks are doing things at DHS, right? So we kind of pull that information back together as a team, me and my field CTO, Judson Graves. So we bring that stuff back together and say, okay, now here's all the things that are happening. How can we, if it's a group that is that is new, we can either tell them what's happened in other agencies and work with those agencies or set up agency to agency conversations if it's something very new. So I mean, I've been having a couple of conversations around how to leverage artificial intelligence to do quantum simulation type stuff. So then we start to go talk to the OEMs because they have folks that are there and we have great relationships with the OEMs. Like, so I'm on the Federal Partner Advisory Board for NVIDIA. So I can reach out to those folks and say, who else is seeing this and how do we get that information back to the clients when they need it, if it's
It's
something we haven't already seen.
a great depth of outreach and resources that you bring back to your clients then.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to thank today's guest, Kurt Steege, the CTO at Thundercat Technology. I'm Terry Gerton, and you're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Thundercat.